5.
Pain in the ass, meet one of my bigger headaches.
Jenna's voice sounded weary. The gentleman smiled, lifting the hat from his head.
Good morning once again, Mr. Rodin. And Miss Jenna, thank you again for availing yourself and your office to me.
He sat in the chair next to Rodin and placed his hat on the desk. His coat was unbuttoned, and Rodin saw a smart jacket with a shirt collar at his neck. And there were no signs of blood anywhere.
Rodin, this gentleman wishes to talk to you. He assures me it's in your best interest to listen.
I don't trust him.
Fair enough. But let him speak.
Rodin balled his fists. No. I told him earlier I wasn't interested. I don't want anything to do with him. He was there when the girl tried to remove me. If I've caused you any trouble, Jenna, it's because of him. Whatever he wants, he can find someone else. He opened his hands, pushed down on the arms of the chair and rose to his feet.
Sit down, Rodin. Just listen.
No. I'm leaving. Jenna opened her mouth to say something else, but Rodin spun, striding to the door. He didn't glance at the gentleman, didn't trust what he'd do. The guards stepped in from either side of the door, blocking his exit. They didn't raise their weapons, but Rodin noted how their fingers rested on the triggers. Not a good sign.
Leaving isn't an option,
Jenna said from behind him.
Sit down.
Rodin took a breath, saw how the situation was getting out of control, how he was losing control. He held the air in his lungs, counted to 5, then turned. Jenna glared at him, leaning into her desk, both hands on its surface. The gentleman faced her, his back to Rodin. Rodin nodded slowly. Okay. But not until I've had some answers.
You're in no position to make demands.
And you shouldn't let him dictate what you do. He wasn't sure where that came from, but it struck home. Jenna's mask slipped and anger burned bright on her face. Anger and frustration. Her jaw was set firm, her teeth clenched.
Oh, I'm sure we can accommodate our hot-headed assassin's request,
the gentleman said, his voice rising and falling almost musically as he picked a non-existent piece of lint from his trousers.
A couple of questions to settle his mind, and then I can have my say. Yes.
That seems fair,
Jenna said, eyebrows arched. Rodin nodded. It was the best he was going to get.
Then sit, and let's be civil about this.
Rodin sat, but he took his time about it. He crossed his legs. It felt strange, but mirroring this gentleman's pose seemed important. He even brushed imaginary dirt from one knee. The man smiled wryly.
A man of action, but also a man with self-control. So, what would you ask of me, Mr. Rodin?
There were so many questions, but Rodin settled on a straightforward one. Were you behind the attempts on my life this morning? The gentleman laughed.
You need to ask that. When I was attacked in the alley, you were barely a step away in the shadows. If I wanted you removed, don't you think I could have done the deed myself there and then?
That made sense, of course, and Rodin cursed himself for asking such an obvious question.
Incidentally, Miss Jenna,
the gentleman continued,
I do apologize for leaving that particular piece of rubbish behind earlier this morning.
There won't be many who grieve his passing,
she said, shrugging the matter off.
But maybe we can get on with business now.
And the upturn in her voice at the end, turning what should have been a statement into a request that wasn't Jenna's normal style. Another question, Rodin said, holding up a hand. Jenna looked daggers at him, but the gentleman raised his own hand.
I see no harm in letting Mr. Rodin ask one more.
Fine. One more.
Rodin turned to the man, stared into that placid face. It was almost mocking in its lack of emotion. And in his peripheral vision, Rodin saw Jenna, her eyes darting between himself and the gentleman. What have you got over Jenna? Her fist slammed onto the desk.
Out of place,
she yelled.
You have no right to ask that, rogue.
Interesting that she was so riled. I've already asked it.
He won't answer.
She jabbed a finger at the gentleman.
I forbid it.
Can you do that? Rodin took a breath, forced himself to calm. Hatred washed off Jenna, and he tensed, expecting her to signal for the guards.
Oh, so mistrusting.
the gentleman said, the slightest of smiles on his face.
That is only to be expected from one in your profession, Mr. Rodin. But in this case you are reading too much into things. Miss Jenna and I, we have a mutually beneficial arrangement, and that is all you need know.
There was a coldness to his final words that hinted of violence. Half the thugs Rodin encountered aimed for the same tone, but they sneered as they spoke and were nowhere near as chilling as this man. The man raised his eyebrows, as if anticipating a comeback. But Rodin knew he needed to tread carefully. He wouldn't get any more out of this man, not on this subject anyway, so the sensible move was to back down. Rodin nodded. Fair enough. Even though fairness had nothing to do with it. Jenna's shoulders sagged, the tension fading.
So can we continue?
Of course.
The gentleman nodded politely, raising a hand as if to tip a hat, even though it still sat on the desk.
You deserve to know who you are talking with, Mr. Rodin, and it would be remiss of me to fail to introduce myself. I go by many names, but Jenna knows me as Kat. I work for certain powerful people. Naturally, they don't appreciate others interfering with their concerns, and when matters require morally ambiguous solutions, they call on my services.
So this is a contract?
Naturally.
No. The man's expression didn't change, but Rodin saw Jenna stiffen. He wondered if many people got to say no to this man more than once. Cat. It was a stupid name. Weaker than dogs, cats were scavengers, scrawny things that lived on the edges. But they were independent, and they could be vicious when cornered.
But you haven't heard the details yet. This contract is ideal for one with your unique skill set. I have searched hard for someone capable of completing this little job.
If you've researched, you'll know I'm particular about who I work for.
And this shows integrity as well as intelligence. I also know that you relish a challenge. And this, my dear Mr. Rodin, is a challenge unlike any other.
For a client I cannot trust.
Do you trust any of your clients?
The response was lightning fast, and Rodin knew the question was rhetorical. Rodin had trusted in the past. And he'd paid for that trust. The scar on the back of his leg itched at the memory, a reminder that he could never trust a client. Not even Jenna. Oh, he respected her. She did a wonderful job keeping her district together, and she had many strong friends. No, maybe friends was the wrong word. Allies. Like Kat.
Enough posturing,
She said, her voice weary.
just listen to the man. I don't want you in here all day.
She had a point. Okay. I'll listen. But that doesn't mean I accept.
Of course. I wouldn't hire someone who rushed their decisions. No, I require a consummate professional. This contract has many unique facets, and it requires an assassin with particular skills. This person needs to focus on the target, avoiding all collateral damage. Fast and efficient, yet also cautious, and with an eye for fulfilling the contract with exactitude. You come highly recommended, Mr. Rodin, and I believe you are possibly the only one who could fulfill this contract with the degree of success we seek.
Empty words. Enough flattery. Just tell me. Kat looked to Jenna.
Is he always this hard to please?
You've caught him on a good day.
No doubt his early start helped.
Rodin breathed deep. This lanky fool wasn't going to goad him. And it was his own time he was wasting.
So the contract,
He said, turning back to Rodin.
there are a couple of unique features. The first is the location. The one who accepts this contract, will need to spend time in a place not so far physically from Miss Jenna's fine district, but one that is a society totally unlike any of the districts.
The man was playing more games. And now, he was gazing off into the distance. Rodin followed his eyes as Kat looked over Jenna's shoulder. She turned, and all three of them stared through the window where the sun glinted off the glass structure in the distance.
You've got to be joking.
Jenna whispered. But the man wasn't. The dome. Rodin tried to stifle his laugh, and it came out as a strangled cough.
That's not possible.
Jenna said, as she turned away from the window. Kat raised his eyebrows.
Mr. Rodin has an excellent record. He's infiltrated heavily guarded locations. He's assassinated targets as they slept in their beds, leaving their partners to wake next to a cold corpse. If anyone can do the impossible, it's this man.
But it's the dome.
Kat nodded and turned to Rodin.
Tell me, what do you know of the dome?
Rodin took his eyes from the window. The image of buildings behind the glass burned into his mind. He took a long breath. What did he know of the dome? What did anyone know?
Please don't overthink. Tell me the first thoughts you have when I mention the dome.
Rodin shrugged. Perfect society, all hidden under glass. There was so much more he could say, but he needed to know where Kat was going with this. How much did the man know?
But what of its history? You're an intelligent man. You read and you listen. I would be interested to hear your impressions.
Can you not read this for yourself? Rodin forced a friendly smile to hide his annoyance.
Indulge me, please. I have good reason for asking this.
The man used too many words. Rodin had heard speech like this before, and it unsettled him. He realized he was copying the style. His last question, why did he say so much when a simple read it yourself would have been sufficient? He knew why, of course. And that disturbed him even more. He needed to be careful. He gave another shrug. The basics. The world went to crap, and a group of people barricaded themselves in, threw out those who didn't meet their standards. They covered themselves in that toughened glass dome. Other groups elsewhere copied the idea, but this one, and Rodin nodded to the window, is the first. The dome. Kat waited. Rodin kept his mouth closed. He'd said enough.
That's it. The whole of the dome's long history summed up in a few terse sentences. No interesting facts. Come, Mr. Rodin, someone as fastidious about research as yourself must have uncovered some fascinating details. I'd venture you know far more about the dome than many others in the districts. I imagine you're something of an expert.
I focus on my work. The dome doesn't feature strongly in the contracts I accept.
Quite. And yet you must have other interests. Your life cannot consist solely of your work.
Rodin snorted. This morning, someone tried to ensure I never left my room alive. Through my work, I've made too many enemies to afford other interests. And again, Rodin realized he was being drawn into a discussion. After a few moments of silence, Kat turned to Jenna.
Possibly our friend is correct. But as a leader yourself, what do you think of this perfect society?
If the rumors are to be believed, there's no such thing as violence inside the dome. I find it hard to imagine how such a thing is possible.
Oh, it's true. Believe me. And that is why this contract presents so many unique difficulties. To reach the target, our mercenary must assimilate himself into this society so thoroughly that nobody will suspect him to be anything other than a true citizen of the dome.
And before that, he needs to get across the glass.
Jenna said, shaking her head. It's impossible. Rodin knew he'd said that too quickly. And from the way Kat smiled, Rodin knew that the man was aware of Rodin's past. Far more than Jenna.
Apparently so,
Kat said slowly.
And yet, this is what the contract will entail. The target is a man of high standing, a counselor whose career is rising fast. But this man is becoming a nuisance to those I answer to. He is spreading discontent, upsetting the natural calm within the dome. Those above me have tried diplomacy, but the time has come for a more permanent solution.
So why Rodin?
Jenna asked.
Why not find someone in the dome?
Your thoughts on this, Mr. Rodin?
He's trying to trick me, Rodin thought. So he chose his words with care. If there's no violence under the glass, who would they find?
Precisely. Beyond contact sports, any kind of physical aggression is simply not accepted. Those within the dome are extreme pacifists. And so the assassin must come from elsewhere.
Again, why Rodin? I'll admit that he's good, but if there's no violence in the dome, what's to stop even the worst amateur from completing the contract?
And here we reach the truly interesting facet of this particular contract. The target's unorthodox ideas are gaining him a following, and those above me have no wish to turn this counselor into a martyr. Therefore, the removal must appear natural. There must be no questions of foul play. You see, perhaps, the fascinating challenge this poses?
Of course Rodin did. And already, his mind was traveling on lines of thought seeking possibilities. But he couldn't take this contract. And I'm sure whoever you hire will relish it.
You still refuse?
Cat shook his head.
That is disappointing. And possibly dangerous.
Was that a threat? Dangerous?
Dangerous to yourself, yes. Think of what occurred this morning, Mr. Rodin. Your room was booby-trapped, and an assassin attempted to end your life. You asked earlier if I was responsible, and maybe I was too hasty in replying in the negative. I didn't hire the assassin, and I am pleased they failed. But the attempt was intricately entwined with this contract.
Rodin didn't like where this was going. Explain.
This counselor is not without friends, and there are those who wish to protect him. They are aware in a vague way of our intentions, and like us they know that you, Mr. Rodin, are the ideal candidate for this contract. Where I wish to hire you, those protecting the counselor are determined to ensure that you can't take the contract. Ever.
That made sense. But Rodin saw a way to avoid this. He smiled as he spoke. So I turn you down, and I'm no longer a threat to this counselor. I said I'm not interested, and nothing you've told me has convinced me otherwise. He turned to Jenna. I won't take up any more of your time, Jenna. Okay if I see myself out. He rose before she answered. But Kat held up a hand.
Things change, Mr. Rodin,
he said.
Just because you refuse this contract now, those who wish to protect the counselor will still view you as a threat. There is only one way they can be certain you won't change your mind.
There was no emotion in the man's face, and Rodin counted with a straight mouth. Then I suggest, he said, moving his lips as little as possible, that you find someone else for this contract before Jenna's district becomes overrun with dead assassins. He gave Jenna a nod, then turned to the door. His hand fell to his hip, to where he should be wearing his blades, and he stepped toward the two guards who blocked the door. They viewed him dispassionately, then the guard on the right glanced over Rodin's shoulder. With a nod he stepped aside, as did his colleague, and the door slid open. They both followed him down the stairs though. Not that Rodin minded. At least he was leaving that stranger. There was no way he could take that contract. Not in the dome. Rodin never wanted to set foot under the glass again.